Hello, my name is Diana, and it is my honor and privilege to just welcome this amazing panel of trailblazers. All right, starting off with Dr. Okay, let me start over, okay? Start over. All right, starting off with Dr. Kathy Evans. She is currently the VP of Research and Information Systems at Monumental Sports, which involves working for, the men's team, the women's team, their G League team, and their gaming team, which I have some questions about. Prior, she was director of strategic research at the Raptors, and before that at Google. And she has a PhD from Harvard in biostats. And, when she's not getting accolades from the American Statistical Association, she's probably at Disney. So if you have any questions about causal inference or Disney, she's your go-to person. All right, next we have,
good catch, athlete,
Ivana Sharich, who is currently a senior product scientist at Zealous. Prior to this, she was a Swiss Army knife at Overtime Elite. She just did everything from data collection, data analysis, reporting for the scouts, front office, everything. And prior to that, she was a data scientist at the Sixers, and she has a PhD in applied math from New Jersey Institute of Technology. And get this cool fact. She biked 100 miles in a day, in a single day. And while she's not doing like I was going to say badass, but I'm not going to say that. And while she's, not biking or working, she's hanging out with her two cats, Skippy and Pumpkin. And last, but certainly not least, Brittany Donaldson, who currently has two jobs. First, she is a co-founder of Strata, and she will tell you all about that. And also is an assistant coach / director of coaching development for the Hamilton Honey Badgers of the CEBL, and who they just won the championship last week. So can we please give her a round of applause? Prior, she was also the youngest assistant coach ever for the Toronto Raptors. And also, on top of all these amazing talents of hers, she has a killer singing voice. All right, so let's get started on the questions. So I want to know all of yours origin story. How did you get into basketball, or more specifically, basketball analytics? And we'll start off with Kathy and make our way down.
All right, so this is working. Hi, everybody. I just want to say, first of all, thank you for the invitation and for everybody who organized this. It is absolutely amazing to be here, and it's amazing to see this many women in a room to all be excited about sports. I've spent a lot of time in male-dominated fields, and it's just unbelievably awesome. So thank you. So I got into basketball analytics I don't know what I say by accident, but it wasn't something that I ever thought I would be doing as my career. I've been in school. I was in school for a really long time. I spent 7 years in grad school. And while I was doing that, I always sort of liked sports analytics. I'm from the Bay Area. Moneyball, A's was, sort of in my blood. And my home team is therefore the Warriors. And while I was in graduate school, that was right around 2015. Which if you're familiar with basketball is right when that Steph Curry dynasty started happening. And a lot of my friends were really into basketball. And I actually wasn't so much. I was much more into baseball and football at the time, but my home team was doing really well and all of my friends were hanging out and watching games. And so I started watching games too. And my mind would just immediately go to these basketball related questions. And so I started doing that as my hobby. And I think a lot of people have mentioned that this was sort of their hobby on the side, and then either continued to be a hobby and they have their regular jobs, or it became a career. And that's what happened with me, which is that I was doing biostatistics and I did that as in my career for a couple of years, but I kept doing sports analytics on the side, primarily basketball, but a little bit of football as well. And then when I decided that I didn't want to be in healthcare anymore, I just ended up making my hobby my full-time job, and now I actually don't really have any hobbies. So if anybody has any suggestions.
Cycling.
I have gotten into cycling. Yes. I recently learned that like electrolytes are really important when you exercise a lot.
Just want to reiterate, of course, Tegan's one of my best friends, and really, really amazing job organizing this conference, to all the ladies organizing it, and so happy to be here and speak on the stage with these other amazing ladies. And how I got to basketball, well, obviously I'm 6'2". So I played basketball since I was 7 years old, and I also liked math since I was 7 years old. And my whole life, I was kind of in between, like, oh, should I put all my efforts into basketball, or should I put all my efforts into math? And luckily, I did not decide to choose just one of them. So I just kept doing both, like, you know, not being the top, but being okay at both. And so yeah, so played basketball in college and studied applied math. One of the reasons was because it's the same in every language. Coming from Croatia, I didn't have to learn all these new words, because math is just math. It's the same, right? So I studied math, and then decided not to play professional basketball and stay in graduate school at the same university at NJIT. And, at the time when I started, I was like, I'll just do it for 2 years, take my master's degree and go play professional basketball while my college injuries healed. But then, after 2 years, I was like, this is kind of fun. Let me just finish it. And then somewhere halfway through that, I've learned that the NBA teams were hiring data scientists. So I was like, oh, what is data science? So looked it up, took some online classes. And luckily, when I was finishing my PhD, Sixers were hiring. So I got the job, and that's how I got into the field.
Yvonne is being very modest. She played Division I basketball. She didn't mention that part. Yeah, to reiterate everything you guys said, so refreshing to look out into this crowd and be here and be speaking up here. And like, I don't know, 5 years ago when we were at a different analytics conference, I think 3 of us here on stage, there's a group of like 7 or 8 of us that got dinner one day, and 3 of us are sitting up here on the stage. Sorry, Kathy, you weren't quite here yet. You were doing cool things at Google at the time. Yeah, and just to see the growth in the last 5 years is really, really inspiring. So how did I get into, is that the question? How did I get into basketball analytics? Well, my dad put a basketball in my hands when I was about 2 years old, and that was kind of it. I grew up playing basketball my whole life. I played Division I basketball. I had aspirations to play pro. Unfortunately, I had to cut my playing career short because I had 4 knee surgeries in college. But as I was playing basketball, I was also studying statistics and actuarial science for no real good reason. I had no real plan with that degree. Math had always come pretty natural to me. And honestly, I picked that major because I knew I'd be missing a lot of class due to basketball. And I didn't want to have to spend a lot of time making up the time I'd missed. And so, yeah, that was sort of my reasoning. But, every project I did in undergrad, I don't even have a graduate degree, so I don't know why I'm making that distinction. But every project I did, I would always gravitate towards sports data, even my own playing data. I would always try and evaluate something related to basketball or baseball or really anything in the sports realm. So after my playing career, I was like, oh, what am I going to do with my life? Because I wanted to play in the NBA when I was 5 years old. I have that written down somewhere. That's not happening. I had to decide, like, what am I going to do? I have the statistics degree, and kind of similar to what these 2 have said, we kind of learned that, baseball had already been pretty far along in the sports analytics movement. Basketball was like kind of just starting up. So I just started applying for like every job possible in the sports industry, whether it was media, team side, product side, that had the word analyst in the title and that I was qualified for. Didn't hear a lot of responses. But eventually I got my foot in the door at now Stats Perform. It was Stats Inc. at the time. So on the product side, with their player tracking data product called SportView, which all of the NBA teams were using at the time. So I started off at Stats and eventually worked my way into the NBA through there.
And oh, I should add that Britt is an NBA champion with the Toronto Raptors. And if I'm interpreting the numbers correctly, that's 2 championships. So if, you know, for all people hiring out there, if you want to win a championship, hire Brittany. Oh yeah, or go work for
I
Brittany.
know how to pop some champagne, that's for sure.
So Kathy, I have a follow-up question for you. You know, so you sort of mentioned that, you know, you did a lot of research on your own and, you know, did Twitter play a role in that? So like, if so, do you think it helped you, you know, in your career? And, you know, do you recommend it as a platform?
I'm so tempted to just be like, no, it didn't. Yeah, no, I think Twitter is the greatest and worst like thing in the world right now. It's an absolute hellscape, but it's also one of the greatest ways to network with people and to interact. I started getting on Twitter because I would go to statistics conferences and there would always be like hashtag JSM 2018. And that was a really good way to connect with other people who were studying the same field as me, which is causal inference. And I started going to the statistics, you know, panels or sessions that were happening at these statistics meetings, or sorry, these sports ones. And that's how I sort of ended up interacting with people who were in the sports space, which is that I would sort of tweet at them or comment on the talks that they'd made. And it was a lot easier to do that, to sort of make a comment on somebody's talk than to go up to them after their panel or after their session and say like, oh, hi, I'm Kathy and I really like basketball. And because I was just really awkward, you know, back then and probably still now, but not as much. And I found that that was just enormously helpful. And so I always try to tell people that it's about, you know, like having public work. And I think that's been a theme today of like, oh, do stuff publicly, put it out there. People will notice you. They'll try to hire you. Obviously, like not everybody has the free time to do that. But if you're able to engage with what other people have done, like it isn't even necessarily go to a conference, comment on somebody's talk. It's somebody else posts something, engage there, go into the comments and say like, this is really interesting. I've noticed this, this, and this, or did you think about this other thing? And it's a really easy way and a sort of like, I don't know, non-threatening, kind of low risk way to get involved in the space. It's also horrifying, especially to be a woman on Twitter and a woman in sports, but I think it's been great.
So, and okay, so like all of you have such incredibly like different experiences working with different leagues. You know, Kathy, you do work with the Wizards and the Mystics, Alana, Sixers, OTE, Brittany, Raptors, the Honey Badgers. Could you tell me about, you know, like any differences between those professional sports leagues in terms of, you know, utilizing data, whether it's, you know, just having data, collecting data, you know, stakeholders' reaction to the data, and, you know, how did your roles sort of change? And, you know, now we'll start with Brittany and then make our way this way.
Yeah, it's a great question. I can kind of start by distinguishing my experience on the product side versus the team side. So when I worked at Stats, primarily my job was to, at the time, not a lot of the NBA teams had analytics staffs, like sophisticated ones at least. There's maybe a couple teams that had a couple employees on the team itself doing any sort of analytics work. So at the time, I was sort of acting as a consultant for all 30 NBA teams from, you know, using the player tracking data. If they had any custom requests, they would kind of come to me and then I would put together the report for them. So that was really interesting because I started to learn like what types of questions do teams care about, especially the decision makers, whether it was front office staff. Most of the time it was actually somebody from the coaching side that had requests. But I always was like, I want to know how they got to this question, or like what conversations were happening that led them to inquire about this, because I don't know if they're even asking the right question. And when I moved over to the team side, like it was so much, I guess, better for me as a data analyst because I could be in the meetings, I could be at practice, I could understand the nuances that went into, you know, what led them to asking this question. And then I could actually add my input into, you know, is this the right question to ask? Should I redirect it? Or, you know, are we spending too much time on a question that won't really have much impact from a data standpoint into like driving into action, you know, all these types of things. So just having that extra context on the team side for me was like way more fun.
So for me, starting with the Sixers, my experience was very similar to Brittany, working with the coaches and seeing how they come up with questions and what questions they asked. And then for the past year, I worked with Overtime Elite, which was a new league. So starting from the scratch and talking about, you know, the data availability and kind of data that we had, and really, you know, you have nothing. You start from the scratch. You have scouts who are, you know, evaluating players, and you try to make them collect the reports and create some kind of data on our prospects. And you know, for high school basketball, there is not much data. Most of the high schools, like when we traveled and to other schools, they did not have anybody taking box score stats. They had a book that they tracked points and fouls for each players and nothing else. So I was actually a statistician on those games and taking the stats along with one of my other data scientists on the team. So really just going from, okay, so we're starting a league, and how do we collect this data and like learning the software and making sure it's a high quality data. And it made me very skeptical about any data source that is not checked post game, but it's collected manually. Just because once you see how the process works, you realize how easy it is to make mistakes. And unless the data is checked afterwards, I don't trust it at all. So there was a big difference. And also at OT, we focused more on player development, which meant we also used a lot more practice data and tracking how our you know, players improving in different shooting. You can see Noah shot tracking here as well, which we used a lot. And that was like the biggest difference, is really focusing on player development versus how do we win games.
So I think I'll comment on the WNBA NBA sort of divide a little bit, which is there's a lot of data that comes in for the NBA. I mean, there's like a lot. There's like contract information, you know, sort of box score stuff, which includes like attendance and who the, you know, TV broadcaster was, all kinds of stuff. Play by play, and then the tracking. And the tracking is both the raw tracking and then, you know, markings files that we get, or anything on top of that. Not to mention any sort of sports science, biomechanical things that we're able to collect in game or in practice. And with the WNBA, it is well, you still get the box score and you still get play by play, but you don't get any of the second spectrum tracking data. And what's interesting there is we develop a lot of reports and a lot of sort of like investigations and, you know, projects that we're doing for the Wizards. And what's sort of useful about it is you can just change the league flag to the WNBA. And if it's an automated report, if it's a website, if it's a tool that we built, if it's a Shiny app, it will just work for the WNBA. For the most part, you have to take into account the fact that like the quarters aren't as long. And so like if you have something that's based off of like 12-minute quarters, it will break. And so you have to make sure that that's built into it as well. But it is really nice. On the other hand, we don't have any of the second spectrum. So any of our metrics or anything that we've built out that it combines play-by-play with the tracking data, it just doesn't work. It'll just break immediately, or it'll give like a smaller version of it, which in some ways is like, I mean, it's just kind of the way it is. And I think there's discussions of bringing second spectrum to the WNBA. Of course, then you'll have questions of like, can you use models that were trained on NBA data in the WNBA? Is it close enough, right? There's a certain amount of physics, balls in the air. It shouldn't matter that much with the way the game is played and the way you identify, automatically, tag certain types of plays. Will that be applicable? And I think that'll be a really interesting question in the next couple of years. But for the most part, we try to develop things that can be used for both teams. And I think it's sort of the idea is like the baseline is what can we do for everybody? And then the Wizards gets built on top of that. And what makes it really nice about it is when the Mystics season started, we just went to them and said like, well, these are all the reports that we build for the Wizards that we could build for you. What would you like to see in your pre and post game reporting that we're going to create? And then over time, we actually developed additional ones while their season was on, and we can turn around and deliver those to the Wizards when their season starts in a couple of weeks. And that's great. And additionally, we have all these pipelines that are automated and they have to come in, every night, and a bunch of processing has to be done. And they break a lot all the time for many reasons. Sometimes, just for a variety of reasons. I have a great data engineer. And when you only use like NBA data, you won't know your process is broken. Like maybe you'll find out during summer league, but summer league is weird. And so like it breaks anyway, because the rosters are weird and there's some guy and you don't know who he is. So it's like, it's going to break anyway, but you usually won't know until preseason. And then you have like 4 games to fix your pipelines before game 1 starts. When you have a WNBA team, you fix it immediately. Like all of our pipelines, like they kept breaking for the Mystics, which is unfortunate because it meant that a lot of our reports for the Mystics got delayed by a couple of days or a couple of hours. But it does mean that we're sort of able to keep this development process going year round, which has been an amazing like boon for my group.
So, we talked about your, previous roles, differences in leagues. So I would love to know, what do you do in your current role? We can start with Ivana and then Kathy and then Brittany.
Sure. So I'm currently at Zealous as a senior product scientist, and I've been there for just 3 weeks now. So I can tell you that most of my work so far has been onboarding. And I started actually looking at the products and doing science on them.
Yeah, so I'm a manager. When I was with the Raptors, I was more of an individual contributor. I was sort of this researcher, and I would talk to my boss maybe once a week, maybe less than once a week, and have these sort of like high level research questions. And I would just go down this rabbit hole and try to answer them. And sometimes it was based off of like conversations that the research group had. And sometimes it was from a specific, sort of end user. I remember working with Brittany on a specific question about a specific player. I won't go into details for NDA reasons. And I could just go down this little rabbit hole and figure out what I was doing, and come up with some result and present it, and maybe, and they would eventually filter to the proper end user. And I don't write a lot of code these days, which is really unfortunate, because I think I'm losing that skill as a result. But what I've gained is sort of being a project manager and understanding the team that I have, and being able to put together a research group that really does everything that's necessary, which is sort of having a data engineer and then a full stack engineer and then some data scientists who sit on top of that. And then being able to work with the end users, being able to go to Coach Wes or Coach Mike, and figure out what they're looking for and what they're interested in, talking to Tommy, our general manager, talking with the people in the Go-Go and the Mystics and all of that, and really be able to dig in and have the higher level conversations about what's important and what they care about, and then go through and project manage my team. Like literally, like there is a Trello board and a bunch of cards, and I have to figure out how to do that. And I previously just never did. When you're sort of an individual contributor and you're just working on the thing that you care about, this idea of like, here's our timeline and here are the sprints that we're doing was not really what I was used to. It's like it's different, and I do miss a certain amount of coding, and I have a chance to do a lot of that because I have a biostatistics background. I've worked with a lot of physicians, so I will answer a lot of the questions that the medical team has, because it's a lot of times it's sort of one-off, or it's like, hey, we have a player coming in with an ACL injury. Can you read the literature on high performance athletes with ACL injuries so we can decide, we can sort of figure out what we're expecting from him this season. But that's sort of my sort of day-to-day in my role is it's a lot of managing my team and making sure that we're prioritizing the right things at the right time.
So as you mentioned before, I wear a few hats. I have a few roles, but I can start with my most recent role with the Honey Badgers. So I was an assistant coach, but I also contributed to coaching development. And this is kind of a new thing that's happening in professional sports, like having people on staff to help coach the coaches. So assistant coach duties, everything from helping implement drills in practice to plan practice to scouting reports to individual film sessions with players, all of those things. But then the coaching development side, which is something I've become really interested in the last couple of years. How are we optimizing as a coaching staff on our players' ability to learn? So how are we structuring our practices in a way that is conducive to learning and retention? And then even our film sessions, the language we're using, the vocabulary we're using, the way we present information to our players, using, research-based methods, in cognitive science and all of those things to ensure that the message we are sending is sticking. Our CEBL season is 3 months long, so it's very short. So to put in a whole system, offensively, defensively, a whole philosophy, things we want to work on individually with players in that short amount of time, is very difficult. So being able to optimize on the time we have with them, is really important. So that's something I was assisting with the Honey Badgers. And then I also am a co-founder of a youth sports program called Strata Athletics. We launched our first season in the spring. We cater to like 5th through 8th graders. It's primarily just basketball right now. But what we're really trying to do there is reimagine the youth sports landscape. And for those of you who don't know, youth sports is a scary place to be right now. 70% of kids by the time that are playing sports, by the time they reach high school, are just dropping out completely and quitting, for many reasons, but the top reasons being, too much pressure to perform. They're like ranking 8-year-old kids now. It's like so bizarre. So to misguided coaching, to players not actually acquiring new skills or learning. So we're really trying to flip that on its head and reimagine what the youth sports landscapes can be. So, we're very much a developmental focused program. We very much cater to engagement and learning, and we use like the Socratic method of teaching. Instead of just telling kids what to do and where to be, we ask them to reflect. We have them be a part of their own development. So that's something I'm really passionate about. We're about to launch another season in the fall. So right now, as a co-founder, I'm doing everything from ordering jerseys to building our website to I'm like doing it all. So it's been a really great challenge, like entrepreneurial challenge for me. It's something I've never done before, but something I'm really proud of.
Guys, if you have kids, send your kids to
StrataAthletics.com.
So Kathy, you said one sentence that stood out to me. You said, and I paraphrase, like, I just went to Brit, and I think this group of women is very unique in that in sports, in basketball, it's very rare for one woman to have another female coworker that they work directly with. And it just happens that, Brittany and Kathy used to work together, and Ivana and Tegan used to work together. And, this question is for Ivana and Brittany. I just really want to ask, what was it like to just work with other women, and, how has that sort of impacted your experience in sports?
Yeah, I can start. So it was, luckily with the Raptors, we had, 10, 11 women on staff. I don't remember the exact number, Kathy, but, I've worked in male prevalent spaces my whole life, from playing basketball my whole life to, obviously now, in the technical field. And then we've talked about the combination of those two. But being with the Raptors, luckily we had a lot of women, but yeah, everything from what we have to understand is like a lot of these environments that we're talking about that we all work in weren't designed with women in mind, both like the physical space and the, social space, everything. So if you are a woman working in one of these fields or in an organization that wasn't designed with you in mind, like sometimes if you're the only one, it like feels isolating, and you don't really have the language to describe maybe what you're feeling or what you're experiencing, because you don't have anybody else to talk to about it. So what I found is like, an example I can give is when I was working with the Raptors and I moved over to the coaching staff, there had been 2 women on the travel staff. They're not on the coaching staff, but, a physiotherapist, PR person who traveled everywhere with the team. When I shifted over to the coaching staff, I got to experience what they'd been experiencing traveling on the road. And, not a lot of accommodations for women, shockingly, like not a lot of locker rooms for us to use when we go on the road, just little things that like should be basic amenities that we should have. And because now there were 3 of us on the travel staff, like we could have a conversation about it. And they brought it to my attention, like, oh my gosh, I hope now since you're here, maybe we can have a locker room, like when we go on the road. And I'm like, wait, what? And it just creates the ability to have a dialogue around what we're feeling and experiencing. And once we have a language, we can then take action. You know, we can then make change. And like with that example in particular, we started, you know, documenting every venue we went to and what amenities each venue had. And then we sent that to, you know, like the coaches association and said, hey, like an action was taken. So I think it's vital. Like I would not want to, honestly, I would not want to go back to like working without other women alongside of me.
For me, I guess being in grad school in applied math, I was lucky to have other women in the program as well. So I was, you know, kind of used to and expecting it to have other women. When I joined the Sixers, it was before Tegan joined. There was another woman on the team, Tika, and there were other women in the office as well. And it definitely helped when I was there for an interview, and you know, I look around and I, you know, see other faces. And then obviously working with Tegan for 2 years has been amazing. So you know, just having somebody, as Britt said, like, is this what's happening? Is this, you know, is it just me, or is this real?
The validation is like so huge.
Definitely. Like sometimes you may think, oh, am I just going crazy? Like,
Yeah.
like, did he just say that? So yeah, obviously it really helped, and you know, kept me in sports, and now joining Zealous, there's a lot of women, so which we saw here on the stage this morning. So you know, just kind of continuing, and it's really nice to have the support group here on the stage, and some people in the audience here to really, you know, come together and support each other.
All right, hiring managers out there, take note, okay? All right, so we all know that communication is such a big part of working in basketball analytics, right? So this question will be for Kathy and Ivana. How do you deal with people who, you know, either don't care about or just don't understand analytics?
First of all, I just want to say that like communication is the center square in the like sports analytics bingo card. Yeah, I mean, this is, I think if you work in data analytics in any space where there has been very common, I used to work with physicians and doctors, you know, looking at diabetes stuff, and it's not that they don't trust statistics. A lot of doctors have had statistics classes, but it's sort of a different level of trust. And I like, the word validation was said about having other women in your space. And I think validation is also a really important part of communication with end users, which is that I have found that in talking to our team physicians or our trainers or the coaches or anybody about a question that they have, that a lot of times they have this question that they're trying to answer. And sometimes I can't help them, or like the data just doesn't exist. And instead of, you know, just being like, I don't know, we can't answer that, or giving them an answer that like isn't exactly what they want, a lot of what it is just like listening to what this person is trying to do. They are trying to be effective in their job. They are trying to help this player shoot better. They are trying to understand the health of this injured player. And a lot of it is just the like, no, I hear you. I understand that this is frustrating. And that has been really big. And I sometimes wonder if being a woman has actually helped me in that kind of space, because women do a lot more emotional labor. And as a result, it just helps you be more effective, that a lot of the often men who are, you know, sort of the end users find it easier to be a little more open with me. But maybe not, right? Like, you know, this should be applicable everywhere, but I like to think that it helps. And so I would encourage, you know, like the women in the audience who are trying to be more effective in their jobs or to break into this space, that like take advantage of that. You know, be good at what you are good at. Don't try to like conform to what other people are doing to succeed in this space. You can succeed in your own way. And I would also say that you know, trying to spend time with people outside of the office. I went on a road trip, and that was really great for getting a chance to talk to people, because you're stuck in a hotel, especially during COVID, you can't do anything else. And so you just end up sitting and chatting with people. And it's not even about the like, hey, how can my group help you? It's just the like, I don't know, what are you worried about these days? Or like, you know, what are you working on? And then coming up with some ideas about how to possibly help them. And sometimes it's not that there was a specific ask. It's a like somebody was mentioning something about a player. And then like 5 days later, I can come to them and say like, hey, remember that thing you were talking about with insert name of player here? Well, so I pulled this data on it and like, oh, you were right. And this is the trend that we've seen over the past several games or the past several years. And so that's ended up being really impactful.
Yeah, I think Kathy just said that beautifully. I don't think I have too much to add, but obviously communication with the coaches is really important. Like they don't understand how we get the answers, and they don't need to understand it, but being able to speak their language and translate what we've done to basketball is extremely important.
Can I add something to that?
Of
Because
course.
I
yes.
have primarily worked with coaches, so they might be the hardest demographic in this regard to communicate, similar to your experience. So you just mentioned it, like speaking their language. I think before we mentioned on a different panel, like trying to educate coaches on like how, you know, analytics are derived and like where it's coming from and like how it's, you know, and that's 100%. I think what needs to happen, coaches need to become more educated, but also like we as translators, as people who are putting these reports together, gathering the data, everything, like also need to become more educated on what the coaches are talking about in their experience. And so spending time with them and like really trying to understand the nuances of like, whether it's the language, the terminology that they use, that builds trust. If they can see that you've put that work in, that you understand, that you speak that language, that builds trust. And then the other thing I would say is oftentimes coaches are very much looking for like a black or white answer. Like I need this or this, what is it? And sometimes like admitting that you don't know, like you don't always have to have the answer, admitting that, you know what, we're going to need to look into that. It might take a week, or you know what, we don't have enough data to give you an answer on that right now. Like we need more time. Just saying that instead of just acting like you have the answer all the time, I think builds trust as well. It adds that like human element to it. And also it's like, it sort of hedges your, I don't know, if you say you know the answer all the time and you're not right, that you immediately lose credibility. So
It's better to have no answer than the wrong
exactly.
answer.
Yeah. So just admitting you don't have an answer is better than, you know, having an answer that might not be accurate.
I'll add that one thing that I've had to do, especially in this new role, is really pay attention to the kinds of things that people bring up and that they think about. And it's sort of in passing, and it wasn't actually a question, because in 2 weeks, it's going to be a question, and then I'll already have the answer for you. And so that's happened a couple of times where I was like, oh, they're going to want to know this. They don't know they're going to want to know it, but they're going to. And then it was like, oh, what is this thing about, you know, like, I don't know, cap implications. And it's like, bam, got it, boom. And then they trust you more. Yeah.
Got it. Awesome. So I'm really glad, you know, you all brought up, you know, sometimes just not knowing the right answer. And, you know, sometimes you get requests that are time sensitive, sometimes maybe not so time sensitive. And, you know, where do you sort of find the balance between, you know, giving them what is, I guess, accurate versus, you know, delivering it to them in a timely fashion? Because we all know like basketball is a very time sensitive sport.
Yeah. I mean,
You don't get those 4 a.m. emails like I did, do you? Hey, I need this
Oh,
in 30 minutes.
okay, I've gotten 4 a.m. texts.
Okay.
And I've gotten, hey, we're playing this team tonight. I
Get
need
you up.
information on this player as I'm pulling into the parking lot. Thankfully that one was from somebody who like understood exactly what they were asking for. It's a trade-off. And it always is. Like sort of our jobs are fundamentally quantifying uncertainty. And so I think that like no matter, like I can very rarely ever give you an absolute answer for any question that you have. And so therefore it is always about the like, okay, I can get you an answer, but I really don't trust it that much. And if I gets to a point where I really don't trust it, I'll just be like, I can't answer that, or I can't answer that with any level of certainty. And if they want an answer, I'm like, you're going to have to get it from somebody else. And if you're going to choose to make a decision based off of something that's bad, I want no part of this. And I don't think you should do it. And that's sort of what it is. And then sometimes it's just the like, it also depends on, I would say, the severity of the question, which is that if, you know, it's sort of like, if it doesn't matter that much, if like the downside isn't that low, then like, all right, fine. Okay, sure. Yeah, I mean, it's not going to make that big of a difference. But if it's a like, who should we trade for? Who should we draft? Then we're going to spend months working on that.
Got it. And Britt, you brought up an interesting comment earlier about you know, coaches want sort of black and white, and don't mean to put you on the spot. This is open to anybody. And you know, like during my time in sports, I've heard multiple times, and I quote, "My eyeballs don't agree with that." So how would you respond to something like that?
Yeah, it's tough. So like I am a coach, so like I really empathize with I empathize with both sides, honestly. Like when coaches do say things like that, I like kind of see where they're coming from, but also I see, you know, maybe the more objective point of view. It's a good question. I think Kathy kind of hinted at it, and what I was going to say is like being really clear and transparent about it's like this isn't certainty. It's you know, we're maybe 5% better by doing this. You know, we're maybe it's marginal improvement, right? And but over a large sample size, that's significant. But it's not going to be like a significant change in one repetition. You know, like being really clear about that helps. And then, yeah, it's just you hit on it too, Kathy, like anticipating what coaches are going to ask, anticipating the things that might come up, and being proactive about answering those questions before they even happen. Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't happen overnight. like bringing coaches to the dark side doesn't happen overnight. It's a long process.
I would say it sort of ends up, to add to that, is there's maybe a combination of two things, which is one, how open is that audience to having their mind changed? So if they are just never, ever going to change their mind, then I'm like, I don't know, I just kind of don't want to waste my breath. Like, it's just an uphill battle that's not worth fighting. But if they sort of are open to having their minds changed, I think it's understanding, okay, why does your eye think opposite from the data? Or are they parts where they agree? Or are they parts where they disagree? And if it disagrees and we can understand why, I can explain, like, you know, okay, this guy scores a lot of points per game, but that's because the ball is in his hands a lot. He's actually not very efficient. And if you start, you know, if you can actually point to the reason, then you can start, you know, having a better dialogue. And some, you know, that example I gave is like, I think very simple. And I think a lot of coaches would immediately understand. I think they all already immediately understand. But there are more nuanced examples of that. But even sometimes you can draw a parallel. So maybe there's something that's similar to that example I just gave with like points per game versus efficiency. And you can say, well, it's like the difference between points per game and efficiency, or it's looking at a single, you know, the rebounds of a single player versus team rebounds when he's on the floor, right? And if you can explain why the eye test isn't matching up with the data, they'll start to understand better, and they'll want the version of the data that kind of like, you know, jives with how they think, or they're going to have to start thinking differently, but you can explain it.
Sorry, I just want to add what Brittany said about it's going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight. Is if you work with the coaches and you have a suggestion on something that they could, you know, do or change or do differently, it's a long season. There's 82 games, and you know, it may not happen at the game 20 when you first notice it in the data, but it might happen by the playoffs time. So just be patient and consistent, and build that trust, and it may pay off at the end.
So building trust and communicating this, you know, this all requires this high level of not just like domain knowledge, but also just technical expertise. And now, you know, as so many teams are sort of hiring, Kathy is hiring, FYI.
Hiring a web developer? Just, you know, talk to me.
You know, like, you know, when you're hiring, obviously you want the unicorn, the one who's expert at both, which is we have 3 of them here, but you know, they're very rare. And, you know, as you're looking, like what almost like, I don't want to say more important, but like, what is like a priority? Is it someone with more domain expertise, but less technical, or more technical, less domain? Like, is there a balance, or is there like a sweet spot?
you're the only one hiring here.
Okay,
so.
yeah, sure. I mean, my first answer was like, I want John Urschel to work for me because he played in the NFL and he has a PhD in math. Like, that's the ideal. But it is a question, like, is this a basketball job or is this a tech job? And I think I have asked people throughout the league how they think about it, and I've gotten very different answers from very different people. And I would say it probably depends on your role, which is that if you are a data engineer, it is a tech job. Right? Like, it matters that you care about basketball, and it matters that you understand that the data coming in matches what you would expect. I have worked with outside contractors who are like, the data's coming in fine. And it's like, yeah, that's because there's no NAs, but it says Steph Curry is shooting 2%, right? Like, it's just clearly wrong. So there has to be a certain amount of domain knowledge. But that is a tech job, right? You need to make sure the data comes in overnight, the pipelines are working. On the other hand, the person who is directly interfacing with the coaches or directly interfacing with players, that is more of a basketball job. And so I think, there was a great talk at the joint statistical meetings. Was that last week, 2 weeks ago? I have no sense of time these days. That was sort of thinking about data science in general in the space, right? As the definition of data science expands and as many more fields hire for it, everybody wants the unicorn, and that you can't really find somebody who does it all. What you need is a team that does it all. And so stop trying to hire somebody who is a full stack engineer, from DevOps to data pipelines to back end to front end. And also they can build a really great, scikit-learn model and then put it into a shiny app that your coaches will be able to understand. Like, that person doesn't exist. And if they do exist, they've already been hired and they're going to be able to get paid a lot.
And her name is Tegan.
Yeah. And so, I think of my team as being mostly a tech team because we serve a variety of different groups. My team, helps multiple, actual basketball teams. We help the front office, we help scouting, we help medical, all of these other things. And so it would be impossible to have domain experts in all of those spaces. So we are primarily tech, but I think the closer you get to the court, the more you have to be a sport person.
And I'll have one last question before I open it up to Q&A, and is, what do you all think is going to be like the next big thing in basketball analytics, the next frontier?
I could start with that one. I don't know if this is just my own personal passion project or actually the next big thing. I actually think it is the next big thing because it's happening in baseball right now. And the MLB staffers on the panel a couple panels ago mentioned this, and it gave me a lot of energy because I'm trying to figure out the same problem in the basketball space. But basically answering the question of, is what we're doing in a practice facility, in a training session, in a film session, actually translating to a game, and really trying to put systems in place to evaluate that and improve that. For example, like a rudimentary example in basketball is like, does taking X amount of shots in a practice gym translate to you becoming a better shooter in a game? And, a lot of talent evaluators, a lot of people on teams and front office staffs that acquire talent, they'll so easily just be like, well, we just got to make him a better shooter. In 2 years, if he's a better shooter, we had 5% to his 3-point percentage, he'll be this good. Okay. So how do we get him there? How do we actually get him there? And how do we evaluate if the process we have in place is working or not? Yes, we have this technology now that can track shots, but like, is the data valuable? And something I'm really interested in particular is like, how do we make the environment as conducive to learning and retention as possible? And I've kind of hit on this already, and I'm kind of experimenting with kids on this right now. That sounds way worse than it is. But yeah, like things like, when you're practicing shooting as a skill acquisition, if you're trying to acquire the skill of shooting, become a better shooter, I think there's just a lot of things we need to realize about shooting. Shooting is actually a decision skill on top of like a biomechanical skill on top of, that's where basketball and baseball kind of differ. Baseball has all this really cool, crazy biomechanical technology now, especially with pitchers and batters. But like the setting that you practice pitching or the setting that you practice batting, you can really simulate easily. a game setting, you can simulate easily in practice. Like basketball is a lot more difficult. It's a lot more of a wicked environment. There's a lot more variables involved. There's defenders that you're on the move. There's, time and score pressure. There's a clock. There's like so many things that you have to factor in. And so how can we simulate the environment as much as possible when training? And just, being more conscious and intentional about how we design our drills, how we design our practices, how we get feedback from what we're doing and how we evaluate that feedback. I think it's like a totally untapped area in basketball, and I have like so much interest in it. So that's selfishly where I want analytics to move to in the basketball space.
Obviously, player development, I agree with that. It's a big thing. And also like connecting your data from practice to the game and how that translates. Like if you think of the NBA, we have in practice we're tracking player movements with Kinexon mostly or Catapult if any of the teams are still using it. But then in the game you have the second spectrum, which gives you different tracking data, and then how do you combine it and how do you use that for player load tracking. It's really important for the player development. But then also, how do you convince the players to actually turn on the NOS system and to actually use it and track their shots, and until you have the data, you can't know which drills are helping if the players are not actually using it. But then I think there's also this part about general lifestyle of like getting enough sleep. Like we obviously cannot track that. There's a lot of CBA parts that are prohibiting that, but being able to track like how a player's sleeping. Did he have a bad day because his shot was off, or just he had 3 hours of sleep because the hotel pillow was too soft or something? So you can attribute the bad game to different things, but if you know that the pillow was too soft and he couldn't sleep, then you would interpret that data differently, I guess. So I guess just getting all these data sources into one and getting a complete picture of what's going on and with the player or what's going on the court. I think it's a big thing. So again, like data engineering is big in that, and in getting this data to talk to each other and be able to use it.
I also dream of a world where that data is available for coaches, and like literally, I wish, like, I think this is my coaching development brain talking right now. Like coaches are high performers too. They're high performance, like knowledge workers really. And you have to make very, fast decisions under pressure all the time. It's like, we should have some sort of systematic way of measuring those sorts of things as well, because they're important to our performance, So that's another passion project of mine as well. Glad you touched on that. But like everything we do for our athletes, we should also consider for our coaches and our staff. If we really want to optimize our performance, like the players are not the only ones performing.
I have a lot of things to add, but it's probably too much for the amount of time we have left. So I'll just say they said some great things.
Cool. Thank you so much. And now we will open it up to Q&A. We have 6 minutes. We can get a couple of questions. Anyone have any questions to ask?
Hi, I was wondering, how does your role and responsibilities shift in the off season, and are there any new challenges that arise in the off season?
What off season? Mystics are in the playoffs right now.
Yeah, I think it depends on your role. In the NBA in particular, there really is not much of an off season. If there is one, it's right now. This couple weeks right here. But I would say in the front office, it's much different than on the coaching side. So maybe you guys can speak, and you can speak to both, but maybe Kathy, you start with front office, how that would shift.
I mean, sure. Like the NBA season and the WNBA season, right? There's sort of like phases, which is like players aren't playing preseason, pre-trade deadline, post-trade deadline, pre-draft, free agency, August. And I think like, so I say what off season, but like, it is very different. The Wizards are the primary focus of what my group does. And I can say like, okay, we are doing stuff for the Mystics, but a lot of what it is it's reinforcing infrastructure when you're in the off season. Whereas when the season is on, a lot of it is more answering questions that specific end users have, because we are playing the Sixers in 2 weeks and the advanced scout has a question about, Matisse Thybulle, and who's, a real octopus on the court. So that's sort of what it is. And I would say, like, coming up to the trade deadline, there's a lot more player evaluation, and coming up to the draft, there's a lot more like, okay, building out our draft models, building out the draft platform. Again, answering specific questions that scouts might have about the guy that they really, really like, and they want to be able to go into the draft room and be like, hey, not only do I think this guy looks good, but the data people agree with me too. And I'm like, wait, that's not what we did. So there are sort of these phases to it, and a lot of it sort of runs with the season. But overall, it is always thinking about how do we make our infrastructure better? How do we get better, more accurate data and combine it in a clean way? And it's reinforce what we're already doing and then add on top of that.
I guess I can just add a little bit. Really depends on your role. When I was with the Sixers as a data scientist, I was mostly focused on coaching strategy. So when the draft time came and some other people on my team were stressing and trying to get things done for the draft night, I was just like, oh, okay, I'm just working on my long-term project and nothing's urgent. So yeah, the off season really depends on what your role is.
Oh, yes, we have another question.
Hi, I'm Yuni, and I have a question because Brittany just mentioned about the coach's performance. So from the data side, you always think about the players' analytics. So do you three of you do some like coach analytics, like what they will do next? Because every coaches has their own features and styles.
That would be wonderful. I've honestly never seen much there. Maybe you have, Kathy.
I mean, it's a thing where if you think about a coach as a feature that you could put into a model, and obviously, like I'm reducing this problem to like a data frame where one of those columns is who the coach is. It is certainly something that you could account for, and you could think about that certain coaches have certain playing styles. So, I mean, absolutely, right. You could think about the fact that like, okay, when Mike D'Antoni's with this team and with this team and with this team, what are the commonalities that you see between them? Now, some of it is that you have to inform that from what you know from like subject matter experts who can say like, okay, we would expect this kind of thing from a Mike D'Antoni led team. You could also try to learn it from the data itself. You'll run into a sparsity issue where there aren't enough different coaches playing on different teams to try to like disentangle why is it that this coach and on this team seemed this way? Was it because of the coach, or was it because they had a star player and you're building around that star player? I will say that one space where this sort of comes up is in college teams, where you have a lot of coaches who have been around forever. And so if you're trying to look at draft modeling and you're thinking about specific players, you might want to account for what team they're on, because you know a coach plays a specific type of way.
And some of the coaches come from players to coaches, and while others coach might from other majors. Is there a difference in while communicate with them and their acceptance in like data part?
Not in my experience, but I don't have a vast amount of experience in this space.
I'd have to think about that more. Maybe is the answer. I don't know. Like, I'd have to think about that more. I'd have to really think about the coaches I've interacted with, those that have playing backgrounds versus not. Maybe, but nothing like jumps at me right now. So I wouldn't say that I've noticed a significant difference between those that have and haven't. It's really just like, have they been exposed to it at all before or not? And how familiar are they at all or not? And that kind of, yeah, I think dictates like how much you push it.
I think we have time for one last question, 20 seconds. Yeah.
I'll try to be quick. Hi. So you mentioned that you sometimes have to like say no to people who ask questions. And I feel like a lot of the time, especially starting out, dealing with imposter syndrome and things like that, it's going to be really hard to do that because you just want to provide. So do you have any advice for learning to sort of build that muscle to be able to say no, or let's talk that through, like trying to build up that skill?
So I've told the people that work for me that if they're ever in a situation like that, just say like, oh, I have to talk to Kathy first, and then I'll get back to you. And then sometimes that person never brings it up again, and then it's cool. It's like a pocket veto. And sometimes I will then message them and say like, I heard you talk to Adam about this question you have about this player. That's really interesting. That's really great. And then sort of like a, how pressing is this? We have a lot of other priorities that we have to get to first. I mean, I would say like, I never straight up say no to anybody unless it literally doesn't exist in the data. You know, when there's like, hey, can we quantify like a sense of humor and how that affects the player on the floor? And I'm like, no, that's an easy no.
Use your zodiac signs.
Yeah. Just, you know, like heart and grit just roll into the error term. So we can't quantify it. It's fine. It's basically just saying like, that's a really interesting question. We would love to be able to answer it. There is a question of priorities because we have a number of other things that we're working on right now. And again, you can just defer to your manager if necessary. I'm happy to say no to people. I know you don't all work for me.
One thing to add to that is if if a coach or a scout comes to you with a question, this is also a good door opening. And if maybe you can't answer the question or it's a wrong question asked and you don't want to answer it, you can always say, hey, yeah, let me think about that. But what about this? And then you give them what you actually want to give them, because then you already have that door open and it makes it much easier.
Thank you all so much. And please, a round of applause for our incredible panelists.